Welcome to Horror Makes Us Happy, the podcast where we ask the question, what is it about horror that makes us happy? Your hosts are Steve Becker and myself, Chris Whitman, and you can find out more about us at our website, horrormakesushappy.com. Before we get started, this is the trigger warning. We're going to be talking about horror culture and horror things, which could involve sensitive subjects for some, so things like murder, rape, child abuse, foul language will be said. That being said, if that's not your cup of tea, then maybe go check out something else. But otherwise, welcome to the show. Coming
You've
up in the near...
warned.
Yes. I've been warned.
Sorry.
Coming up in the near future, we'll be speaking with the host of The Harry Horror Show on Twitch, author Paula D. Ash. But today, we have the company of the managing editor for Wicked Horror TV and staff writer and columnist for Dread Central, Mr. Tyler Doupé. Welcome to the show.
Hey, Tyler.
Hey, thank you so much for having me.
Our pleasure. I know we briefly talked about this before you got on, but for anybody who hasn't listened to what we do before, generally the theme of this is we talk about your childhood, teenage years, and adolescence to try to find out what it is about horror that you love and see if that leads to any interesting discussions. Obviously, it's different for every person because everybody's different, and hopefully the end goal is that after talking to a lot of people, if we find some interesting common themes that might teach us something about horror fans in general, that'd be pretty cool too. And if not, then we just spend a lot of time talking to cool people. So
everybody poops.
There's a reference I was going to make and I lost it. Shit.
Damn.
Oh well. And no, the reference wasn't shit. So, well, I guess before we get started, is there anything you want to pitch? Anything you're currently working on?
Well, I am in the home stretch of co-editing a book on queer themes in horror that's coming out via McFarlane Publishing. So it'd be great to get a chance to shout that out.
Yeah, sure. What's the title?
It's called Now You've Stumped Me. No, I'm kidding, but it's changed. We were going to call it The Big Book of Queer Horror, but we just recently renamed it The Queer Horror Film Guide.
Okay. Well, what we can do is we'll create a bio page for you anyway, and we can link to whatever it is that you want to link to. And that way, if the name changes and they can't find it, they can just come check out your page, maybe link to whatever profile that we link to and find you that way and find out more information.
Thank you so much, guys. Much appreciated.
Yeah.
Normally we start by just talking about, earliest memories of scary things. But since you brought up the topic of that book, it doesn't always come up in the call, even if a person is gay. But is that true for you? Is that something that speaks to you in your fandom?
Yes.
Shall we say?
I am gay. In terms of fandom, I will be honest with you. It's not necessarily like my greatest sweet spot. I'm certainly a fan of Rocky Horror and, horror films with gay characters, but I learned a lot more about kind of the intersection as the co-editor of the book that I've been working on for the last several years. I uncovered a lot that I didn't necessarily know existed and, became a little bit more perhaps of an authority on it than I once was.
Yeah, not to brush, paint with too broad a brush, not saying that that's like the only thing that were to speak to you. We've had, like I say, other guests who that has come up, and like you say, it's usually not the primary thing, but it may be an interesting color, shall we say.
Certainly.
So yeah, starting with childhood, what are some of your earliest memories of scary things?
Oh gosh. The first thing that comes to mind is when I was a kid, our main heat source was a wood-burning fireplace. We had baseboard heaters, but we mostly used a wood-burning fireplace and a wood stove to heat the majority of our house. And to get wood for the fire, you had to go out to our carport, which was like lined with a dirt floor, and a dirt and gravel floor, and it was just dark and spooky and kind of hard to see, and you had to work your way. You kind of had to turn sideways and work your way between the car and the wall of the carport to get to the wood pile. And as a kid, that just always scared me. There was just something in the back of my mind telling me that something was lurking, waiting to grab me when I went to go get wood for the fire. And nothing ever actually reached out and grabbed me. But that's one of the earliest memories of, I think, being a little spooked that I can recall.
Yeah, that's naturally scary. I mean, that sounds straight up like one of the scenes out of a horror movie where, you know, the one kid says, "Oh, I'll go get some firewood from the garage," and you get killed.
You're absolutely.
Yeah, I was thinking to myself, that sounds like something that like they sent you on purpose.
Right. There are a couple others too. Under our house, we had a crawl space, you know, where all of like the plumbing and electrical wiring and everything ran between between like the floor of our home and, I don't know, subfloor, whatever it's called. And I guess maybe I was kind of a weird kid, but I used to love going down there and, you know, I'd like hide from my parents or play hide and seek with my friends. And I just thought it was kind of magical, but at the same time, it was very dank, very eerie, and it freaked me out, but I loved it, you know, if that makes sense. And I guess that's kind of the same reason we watch horror movies, is because, you know, they freak us out, but we love it. We like the way that makes us feel. In fact, it makes us happy, one might say.
There you go. Show over. No.
Oh, just spit out my drink.
Sorry.
No, don't be.
All right, it's good talking to you. Have a good day. When you brought up the crawl space, my first thought was that you were going to say that your parents intentionally sent you there again. And
no, it wasn't child abuse or anything.
Well, the funny thing is, I was going to ask if you know, do you have like, are you claustrophobic? And then you turned a complete 180 and you're like, I actually liked the time. I was like, oh,
yeah, it was fun.
That was unexpected. Okay, so carport, crawl space. That's actually kind of interesting because when I was a child in Chicago, my grandmother used to take me to this zoo that it was like I don't want to say a fake farm, because it actually was a functioning little farm. I think it had pigs and goats and maybe even dairy. They were cows, but maybe they were specifically dairy cows, I think. And I didn't remember much of it, but I remember being a teenager after we had moved away from Chicago. And once in a blue moon, I would catch this smell of something that I liked the smell. And it took me many years to realize that what I was smelling was the smell of a farm. But you know, finally I clicked, oh, that's what it was, but I still hadn't connected it back to the zoo until I was dating someone and we went to Chicago. Actually went to Wisconsin for my sister's wedding, but we also stopped in Chicago, and I took her to the zoo, you know, that I wanted to go back and relive some of my childhood. And it wasn't until we got to that part of the zoo that I had that smell. And I was like, holy shit, click. It's like, wow, this childhood, you know, cements a smell. And it's funny, the things that lodge themselves into your brain and you don't even realize it.
Oh, yeah. Smells are very powerful.
I completely agree. I can still smell my elementary school. And it was, you know, I mean, it smelled like paint and butcher paper.
If you can see my face right now, I guess if that's a good thing.
Can be. For me, it was diesel exhaust. I still love the smell of it. I don't know why.
That could explain a few things.
What? It smells good. It's like fresh baked cookies.
Carbon monoxide. Okay, so what about horror media in your childhood? Any particular horror media stand out to you?
Yeah, absolutely. A big one is The Gate with Stephen Dorff.
So good.
That came on Saturday morning, like, you know, when I was born in 81. That movie came out, I want to say like in the mid to late 80s. You know, so I was the right age. It came on in the Saturday morning cartoon block, oddly enough. I mean, it's sort of a kid's movie, but I mean, it's not really a movie necessarily marketed towards really young kids. So it came on during the cartoon hour. And I tuned in around the time that Stephen Dorff's, like, not his real parents, but, you know, a manifestation of his parents come back and say, "You've been bad," and then they turn into goo.
Oh my God.
And my heart was like pounding out of my chest, and I was like, "Oh my God, this is so cool!" And I'm scared to death. And it just imprinted on me in the biggest way. And we didn't have like on-screen guide at that point. We didn't even have the TV guide channel. When I was a kid, we
Right. So you just flipped on the channel and you're like, "What is this?"
And so I was forever searching for that, like into my 20s. And then, I just, as a blind buy, I bought The Gate on Amazon. And I was like, oh, dude, that looks...
Not knowing what it was.
I was like, that looks incredible. And then I got to that scene and I was like, lo and behold, there it is. My search is over.
Yeah.
That's always cool. All right, so turning into Goose, it was terrifying but awesome at the same time. Was it just that it was unexpected, or
it was unexpected, and it felt like something that I shouldn't be watching? I mean, my parents were pretty keen to like shield me from anything like that, so it was very exhilarating. Like I was, that feeling you get when you're doing something you probably shouldn't be, but you're having a great time anyway.
Right. Crossing a boundary.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Any other media jump out to you from your childhood?
Later childhood, I remember seeing April Fool's Day and the Texas Chainsaw Massacre for the first time, but I was probably a teenager, so it wasn't the same level of like thrill and exhilaration, but definitely, movies that have had a profound impact on me over the years since.
Okay.
And there are certainly others. Those are just, the next two that come to mind.
Okay. If those were teenage years, I'll put those down by the teenage section. We'll come back to those. For childhood, let's say, did you have any friends or family who were fans of horror?
Not in my immediate family. My parents were pretty like horror averse. They were, they've certainly evolved a bit since then, but they were very like fundamentalist religious. Basically thought that horror was of the devil, and that was the biggest part of the reason why they were always kind of trying to shield me from anything too macabre. It really ties into that whole satanic panic thing. Like they really genuinely kind of believed that, if you let the dark forces in, they would come into your home and take a hold of you. I mean, it was pretty, and I suppose, not to get too off topic, but I suppose that's probably a big part of the reason why I love horror, is because it was, in my formative years, it was kind of taboo. It was something that wasn't really an option. Like it was something that was off limits.
Yet while you're going through this, I was really tempted to interject and now you're gay.
Yes, horror made me gay.
Oh God. Did you participate in Halloween?
Oh yeah, definitely. I did participate in Halloween. I trick-or-treated until probably like 6th grade or something like that. Grew up in kind of an idyllic neighborhood where, I didn't like really need parental supervision to go trick-or-treating. I could just skateboard down our street in my Bart Simpson costume or, whatever I was wearing, and, hit up the neighbors for candy. And those were pretty great moments, pretty great memories.
We often ask what a favorite costume is. The fact that you remembered that you had a Bart Simpson costume kind of leans into that one.
Yeah, I was Bart Simpson one year. I was a clown another year. The year that the Goonies came out, like it's kind of a strange story, but my parents dressed me up as a Goonie, not actually knowing what the Goonies were. But I grew up about 30 minutes outside of Astoria, so it was just like, it was huge buzz because it was like a hometown blockbuster. And so they just made me a weird costume out of like paper leaves and said, "Our son's a Goonie." And I do have vague memories of that. I was probably 4 or 5, but I just remember walking around looking like a short, stumpy tree.
So were you Mikey or?
The movie wasn't out. I wasn't anything from the movie. I don't know. I think my parents just, decided to make a craft project and give a name to it, to be honest.
Yeah, that's what it sounds like.
Any least favorite costumes?
God, I don't know. I'm pretty planful about that stuff. Like when I'm actually the one that's picking it out. So I don't know. I had fun with all of them. And wouldn't say that I necessarily remember any of them less fondly. Each year was a different adventure.
when we ask that, and not every question is going to hit, but sometimes when we get that, it's either they do have a least favorite for a particular reason, or it's because they had something planned and it didn't work out.
Oh, sure.
Like there's this, that kind of thing. Did you have any really scary dreams when you were a kid?
God, yes. I remember I've kind of, through like cognitive behavioral therapy and mindfulness have sort of overcome it. But I used to be just absolutely terrified of snakes, like afraid to look at them in pictures, afraid to look at them in movies.
Wow.
Just and it stems from being a young kid, camping at my favorite campground, sitting down on a rock, and a snake just came out from underneath the rock in between my legs, and just gave me a big old surprise. And
That'll do it.
So yes, I used to have terrifying nightmares about snakes. I'd wake up in a cold sweat. I'd be afraid to go to sleep because I, thought that the snake dreams were going to come get me. And it was almost debilitating. I mean, it was, it came in waves. Like I would have a wave of them, and in the midst of said wave would kind of be afraid to go to sleep because I would just be so sure that, I was going to have a nightmare, and it became almost a self-fulfilling prophecy.
I'm sure that when you got a little older and Nightmare on Elm Street came out, that was a nice tie-in.
Oh, certainly. And I think the nightmare movies are among the scariest of all because, of course, Freddy can get you when you're at your most vulnerable. We have to sleep. We have to sleep. We have to eat. There are a few things that we absolutely have to do. And he's one of those, horror characters that can get you when you're really in the one place where you should be your safest, but yet you're your most vulnerable.
Right. Mm-hmm. But I mean, you could personally identify with the idea of not wanting to go to sleep and being afraid of the dreams and, that part of it.
Certainly. Certainly. Absolutely.
Thinking about if you were to go to sleep and then he comes after you with snakes, like, holy shit.
Right.
I think there were a couple of them where he did turn into a snake too. Yep.
I think you might be right about that.
Well, this actually kind of ties in with the next question, which is whether or not there was ever a time in your life when you were actually terrified of something in real life. That would also qualify for that too, because you had the actual experience in real life.
Certainly.
Anything else that would qualify for that question?
Nothing to that level. Like snakes were definitely my, kind of single greatest fear. And I've luckily been able to, I don't know that I would go like pet a snake or something, but, if I were to see one crossing the street, I'd, just let him or her get across and, go on their way. But home invasions scare me pretty badly. I think that for similar reasons to, Freddy Krueger coming to get you when you are at your most vulnerable, I think a home invasion is, your home is your sanctuary. It's your safe place. It's where you go to get away from the world. And the idea of someone coming and violating that really terrifies me. So, even now before I go to bed at night, I check double check the door locks and the windows just because it's, even though it's not likely, like home invasions are not the norm. They don't happen constantly. And, usually burglars try to break in when you're not actually home to avoid a confrontation. But still, just the very idea kind of chills me to my core.
It's like the wildlife thing. They're just as afraid of you as you are of them.
Absolutely, right?
Complete 180 of that question. The last question, was there ever a time in your childhood when you felt completely calm or safe or at bliss?
Yeah, I would say so. It sort of ties back to, excuse me, gentlemen. I would say, yeah, definitely. There was a time, and it ties back into one of my previous answers, which is camping at Schaefer State Park, where I had the snake come out from underneath the rock. That traumatized me really badly, but at the same time, Schaefer State Park was just this incredibly tranquil place where you could pitch your tent right by the river. You'd wake up to the sound of the river in the morning.
Oh, that's nice.
Get up, go wading, cook something on the Coleman stove, go for a bike ride, go tubing. It was absolutely incredible. That was definitely the place where I felt kind of most meditative and probably happiest in my younger years. So it sucked that particular event happened there, but it didn't sour my taste for returning.
Good. Yeah, that sounds awesome. Reminds me a lot of when my family and I used to go to, I think it was Unicoi in North Carolina.
Oh, very cool.
Yeah, I miss camping.
So some of our guests have reported that there was sort of like a dividing line between when they were afraid of horror as a child versus when they were then enjoying it. It sounds like this moment on the gate was at least partially on that line. Do you feel like there was a defined or a well-defined line for you, or were you always a fan of it, or like how would you describe your feeling about that?
I've always liked to be afraid. I've always liked roller coasters. I've always liked things that go bump in the night. And it's not to say that I haven't been scared of them. I certainly have, but it's like there's something very almost kind of intoxicating about facing your fears. I think it releases an adrenaline rush and, kind of gives you a sense of accomplishment. And it's like when you overcome something that you are afraid of, I think that it makes you want to keep that up. So I guess, I certainly found horror movies to be scarier as a kid, but I don't think that really deterred me. It was like, well, yeah, that's scary, but I kind of like it. And, maybe if I just keep watching it, I can push through this. And so I guess that, yes, there was a point where they scared me, and they certainly don't scare me as much now because I've, I was on the set for the Evil Dead remake that came out in 2012 or 2013, and
lucky.
Yeah, it was a neat experience, and for a handful of other horror movies, so I've gotten to see kind of deconstructed the way that it's put together, and also analyze them for a living. So I certainly have a different relationship with them now, but I've always loved that adrenaline rush, that thrill, that being scared. Also, if I set my mind to it, I can sit through it, and it's not going to get the best of me. Which brings me back to another thought about being scared in early childhood. If you want to revisit that, but I don't want to.
Sure.
I don't want to take us off course.
No, we're still in childhood. That fits.
Okay. So when I was a kid, and this is a really good one, when I was a kid, our local fire department put on a haunted house that was like, the perfect size for kids. It wasn't a walkthrough, it was a crawl through. And it was like cardboard boxes and crates and, stuff like that. Just the perfect size for a kid to crawl through. And for the first couple years that I went to the fire hall, I would turn around and come out the same way that I went back in. And I was like, this is just too spicy for me. I can't do this. And probably the time I was about 6 or so, I think, maybe 7, I don't know. I made it through for the first time. And that was such a neat feeling because it was like, it wasn't just me that would, turn around and come out the way that I went. And it was kids older than me. Like, it was pretty scary. It wasn't,
okay.
I mean, it was designed to kind of terrify. And so just the moment where I think, overcame that, pushed past my fears, and made the full loop, because it was kind of like a U shape. You went in and then went straight, then you turned a corner, then you went back in the direction that you came. So the entrance and the exit were right next to one another. And I think that was probably, to one of your other questions, was probably a pretty big turning point for me, because I realized, just because something scares me doesn't mean that I have to run the other way. Like, I can be brave enough to endure what it is that makes me uncomfortable and exist with that feeling. And, when I come out the exit, it feels really good knowing that I stayed the course.
So I have 2 things I want to ask about this. First is whether or not, you talked about your parents being very religious and fearful in some respects, but there's at least twice, I think, already where you've talked about facing your fears. Is facing your fears something that you just kind of picked up on your own, or do you think that was like a family value that somebody instilled in you? Do you understand what I'm saying?
I do. And that's a good question. I think my dad always encouraged me to face my fears, but at the same time, I think he sort of modeled like what living in fear looks like and kind of letting fear steer the ship. So I think he tried to instill that in me, perhaps in part because he historically, I think, made a lot of decisions based on fear. And I think maybe it would have been subconscious. I don't think he would have said like, oh yeah, Tyler, I really let fear run my life. I don't want you to do that. But I think that in some ways he did. He let what he was afraid of kind of limit what he let into his periphery. And, maybe subconsciously he wanted to make sure that I didn't do that. But I also have just always been someone that doesn't want to let anything stand in my way, whether it's, career advancement or it's getting what I value most. Like I just have a tenacity that won't let me quit. So it's perhaps a combination of, maybe my parents trying to kind of subconsciously steer me away from making the same mistakes that they did about missing out because of their fears. And then also perhaps just the way that I'm wired.
Right. Combination of the two. This also kind of leads into the second thing that I wanted to talk about, which before I bring it up, I'll share something that from my own life. When I was a kid, my dad had gotten married and divorced a few different times. And at one point I went to go live with his mother, my grandmother, in Chicago. And he was living in Wisconsin, Milwaukee, which is only about 2 hours away. So he would come down and see me on the weekends. And I remember being a kid, and when he would come there on Friday evenings, I would give him this, whatever, as big a bear hug as I could. Until I think in 5th grade at one point, he actually stopped me and said, like, ow, that actually hurts, calm down. And I remember up until I was in my late 20s or early 30s, I think, like, we never hugged like that again. I remember I didn't feel like at the time that it was like, how kids have this thing where they challenge themselves and like they have almost like high water marks in terms of how they judge themselves to be, growing up or getting to be an adult. Like some kids will, it's, I don't want to be a baby. So then you use that to get them to start potty training instead of wearing a diaper. You're like, it's there, but it's not fully conscious. If you understand what I'm saying.
I think I do.
And I'm wondering if you mentioned it being a big turning point to get through this, haunted house thing. And I was wondering if you felt that as a conscious thing, that was part of your I'm a big boy now kind of thing.
I think so, definitely. I mean, I think that, there's no pride in turning around and coming out the entrance.
Well, that's true.
So I mean, I think it was a shameful thing for me not to get through. Like I would go home that night and be like, God, I'm a baby. How could I not get through that haunted house? I'm 6 years old. What's wrong with me? And, so certainly I think that absolutely, to answer your question.
Yeah. I mean, especially after multiple attempts like that and finally overcoming it, it sounds like that would definitely be a turning point.
Enough that he remembers it. Let's put it that way.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think that, that sort of sets a certain precedent. You're like, hey, I can do this. And if I can do this, I can probably do other things that scare me and it won't kill me.
Right. Jumping into teenage years then, you mentioned April Fool's Day and Texas Chainsaw Massacre. Any other things jump out to you as important in your teenage years in terms of media?
Yeah. I mean, I can remember seeing I Know What You Did Last Summer in the theater as a teenager. I was probably 16 or so because I remember driving. Is it that
old?
What?
Wow. Is it that old?
Yeah. It's like 96, 97, 98, somewhere in that range.
Yeah, I guess it is.
So, I remember, driving to the theater to see it. And I remember going by myself because I decided to go at the last minute and, I didn't have time to grab a pal to go. But I really wanted
And you drove there?
Yeah, yeah.
That you had to drive home after that?
Yeah. But no, I remember seeing that and really connecting with it. And I to this day love that movie and think it's a little bit underrated. I think it gets written off as just kind of cheap and silly and vastly inferior to Scream, which by no means is it Scream. And it's not on Scream's level, but it's also not disposable. I think that's a pretty terrific movie and one that I really connected with when I saw it and, continued to enjoy revisiting.
When you say you connected with it, what do you mean?
I just loved the way that it made me feel. Like I remember in Helen's chase scene, just, being ready to like jump out of my seat, just so connected with what was going on screen, almost like in a hypnotic trance, just like I couldn't look away. I felt like I was Helen in that scene. I mean, it connected with me in a huge way. Just the level of intensity. And so, yeah, I guess that's what I mean.
Okay. So you identified with the characters very strongly.
Definitely, with the characters as well as the atmosphere and ambiance and just the execution. The way that it really does serve to scare its audience as one expects or perhaps hopes going into it. Well, most of us expect or hope going into a horror movie. I suppose some people are expecting and hoping that it won't be that bad. But for a seasoned horror fan like myself, we want to be scared because it doesn't happen as often. As you the more that you watch and the older that you get and the less sensitive you become.
You mentioned Helen, I think, twice by name. Is there something about that character that spoke to you?
More specifically, it was just her chase scene I thought was great. I thought she was a likable character, and I wish she hadn't died. Like, I would have rather that she made it to the end than the Freddie Prinze Jr. character, to be honest. But I think it's just from her chase scene. I've written about that a handful of times, I think, in listicles or retrospectives or something like that. So her name stands out probably more because I've referenced it. But yes, I certainly do like her. I thought she was an interesting character. I thought the fact that she failed in New York and ended up back in her coastal town made her kind of relatable, because who hasn't failed at something or shot for the stars and fell short?
Right.
Not me.
What about it?
I never failed at anything.
You're the one.
Perfect.
Yep. Right. Anything in real life terrify you as a teen?
Maybe not as a teenager, but I would say like as a preteen, I was terrified of driving over the Astoria Bridge, not like in a car as a passenger, but when I was gearing up to, thinking like, okay, in 5 years or in 4 years, I'll have my license. And, the first thing I would think was, oh my God, I'm going to have to drive over the Astoria Bridge, which is just this, I don't think it's in the Goonies, but it goes from Washington State to Oregon. It's like 5 miles long. It's one of the world's longest bridges, and it goes up super, super high because it's not a drawbridge. So it goes up really high, and then it, drops really low. And for whatever reason, I was just terrified that like I was going to crash and die on the bridge. I probably even had a few nightmares about that, to be honest, but that was more like preteen, like 10, 11, 12, maybe like 13. By the time I got closer to actually getting my license, I think I realized it was kind of an irrational fear, and that people drove it every day without consequence. So I probably shouldn't be so worried about it. But yeah, I don't know. I probably do have a teenage fear. And it was probably that people would find out that I was gay at my school, in my small town, my, high school graduating class of like 63 or 73 people, I don't remember, where everyone knew everyone's business and everyone was rampantly homophobic, racist, etc. I should back that up. Not everyone, right, but many people in my hometown were rampantly homophobic, racist, etc. And anything that was different by a lot of people was viewed as not okay, and something that we need to get that person into line and show them that they need to be like us. So I think that the reason it didn't come to mind immediately was because it was kind of an internalized fear, something that I didn't even really admit to myself, because I hadn't even really admitted to myself, hey, I'm a gay guy. I was like in such deep denial because it was such a scary thing to think about telling my parents first and foremost, telling my grandparents, telling my friends, how are people going to react? In a lot of ways, I think I just kind of lived in sheer terror that anyone would find out my secret. So that would probably be a really, really honest answer to, what scared me as a teenager. And into my early 20s, I didn't come out until I was, 22 maybe. So, and that was certainly in a time before we had Modern Family and gay senators. And, it wasn't like today's landscape. It was very different.
Yeah.
Even though it's only the course of 20 years or so, so much has changed. And, I know that people certainly still fear coming out. But I think that we've had a lot of cultural shifts since the time when I did. And to be fair, there were cultural shifts between, like the 60s and the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and the time that I did. So that's just, how progress works.
Yes.
But yeah, that was, that was pretty heavy for me, carrying around that secret and feeling like I could never, feeling on a subconscious level, like I could never truly be myself with anyone, because I had this big secret that I was packing around.
Right. Yeah, we're close to the same ages, and doing the math in my head, you were going through your teenage years during the big AIDS scare. So
yes.
Yeah.
There's that too.
There's that stigma of it too. I didn't even think about that aspect.
Yeah.
I was terrified of AIDS. We had that, as I'm sure you'll remember, that kind of like, Ryan White, like he got a blood transfusion and, now he's deceased because he contracted AIDS. That's how easily you could get it. Don't have sex, you'll get AIDS and you'll die. Don't get a blood transfusion, you'll get AIDS and you'll die. I mean, it was very much like we were coming from a place where we didn't have all of the answers, all of the information, or even really effective treatments that could do more than just extend your life a little bit. So, it wasn't like anyone was trying to scare the shit out of us, but at the same time, like it was scary. I mean, it was scary for a lot of reasons. So it makes sense that the education put the fear into us because it was a scary thing. But it also, terrified an entire generation of children, like, probably well into their, adult years. And yeah, I was actually talking to a friend who's about my age recently, and she basically said, our parents were the generation that just tried to scare the shit out of us to keep us from doing things that we shouldn't be doing.
What's funny is as you're talking about this, I'm thinking to myself that isn't it funny how, and this isn't just that generation, it seems like every generation, it's easier for them to try to scare us than it is to do the right thing.
Yeah.
And what I was thinking about even before you started talking about that, I was thinking about how, like with blood transfusions, instead of testing the blood, because I don't know if they had very good tests back then, but rather than test all blood, which you should probably be doing anyway, they just said, no, we won't take blood transfusions or blood donations from gay people.
I think that's still the case, though, sadly. Like, I don't think the Red Cross would accept my blood unless something's changed recently.
Wow.
But here's the thing, like my father in the 70s, he got hepatitis from a blood transfusion from a surgery he had back when he was in the service. Like, they should be testing the blood anyway, regardless from, who it comes from.
Certainly.
Look, they can't be bothered to test blood for whatever viruses or validity or confirmation that it's actually from a human being and not a pig. It's just, these people are busy.
Right. Who's going to pay for that? Is really what it comes down to.
The taxpayers.
And we laugh, but I was going to say we laugh, but that's the reality of it that is their argument. Who's going to pay for it? It's easier that we just make you afraid of it.
Yeah, absolutely. That's you really hit the nail on the head with that one, I think.
Sadly.
Yeah.
Wish it wasn't so clear. All right, flip that question around again. Any time in your teenage years when you felt complete calm, safety, bliss?
Yeah, probably skipping school with my friends.
Nice. Excellent answer.
There was a rope.
Yes.
This ties back into fear, actually. There was a rope swing. Like if you drove about 20 miles outside of town, there was a rope swing on the Columbia River, and you climbed up this like treacherous platform that was made with like twine and like driftwood, basically. That was a ladder and a platform, and you just sat on the top rung of the ladder, which was, I want to say, probably somewhere between like 15 and 25 feet up in the air. And the rope swing was so taut that it required a little like string on the seat that you used to pull it up to the top seat of the ladder. And then you'd like work one leg over the little wooden seat and then the other leg. And then you'd reach your arm out and kind of lean forward and then just drop and swing way out over the like, the gorge or whatever's below. I don't know, not the opposite of an incline, like a decline, like going downhill, you'd swing way downhill and out, like, to where you could see the water. And it was
so this wasn't to jump out into water. It was to go over.
And it was incredibly treacherous because it was built by kids our age. Like it would not have passed any safety standards.
I was just going to say, call OSHA.
I'm just listening to this whole thing. Like we're still on the bliss and safety and calm question, right? This is not another terror because this would scare the shit out of me.
Yeah, no, that's right.
Everything with heights.
Yeah, so, actually, my friend Christian broke his collarbone on it. So
well, yeah, this sounds like so much fun.
But it was the coolest feeling because again, it was like you're conquering your fear that like you can't do this, you shouldn't do this, this isn't safe, and you're just free flying, like not a care in the world when you're actually on the swing. Like after you've gotten over, the initial fear that you're going to die and you didn't die, it's just this incredible feeling of release and adrenaline and excitement and freedom. just doing stuff like that. Like we'd go to the rope swing, we'd, cross the river into Astoria and, go eat at Burger King. And then we'd break into the city water reservoir and go swimming in there. Just like stupid teenage mischief. But that was when I felt the freest and the calmest and the safest. In part because we were doing fun kid stuff, but I think also just because like when you're skipping school, you're getting away with something that you shouldn't be doing, and there's just a certain like I have to enjoy this moment because it's like a stolen moment.
Yeah, there's that aspect of it too.
I feel like I skipped something. Friends that were fans of horror. And did you have any friends that were fans in your teenage years?
Yeah, my friend Christian that I mentioned, who broke his collarbone on the rope swing, was a horror fan and still is to this day. In fact, he just texted me the other day and said, "I just rewatched the '90s Addams Family and thought of you." Mm-hmm. Then my friend Chris, who I didn't actually meet until college, so like later teen years, maybe 19, is a huge horror fan, and we have, remained close since, to this day. And so both of them, I think, probably helped influence my tastes in horror a little bit. In fact, my friend Christian from elementary school and beyond showed me Stay Tuned for the first time with John Ritter, which is not technically a horror movie, but it's about a television network in hell with Satan trying to capture souls. And I mean, I absolutely still love that movie because it's just so macabre and just a little dark and, not what you would necessarily expect to be marketed to kids. But yes, those are the
Please
two.
tell me there are 1-900 number jokes in there.
Yes, I believe there are. There are fake commercials at the end for like Beverly Hills 90666 and different strokes, but it's referring to like the cardiac event kind, not. Oh. So anyway, yes, it's all kinds of satirical silliness. Oh, The Fresh Prince of Darkness is another one.
Hey, you said this was like a horror comedy show, and it was hosted by John Ritter.
Okay, so it's like a fantasy family film. It's PG rated. It stars John Ritter and Pam Dauber from Mork and Mindy. So they've taken two sitcom icons from the 70s and 80s and put them into a 90s, what I'm just going to call a horror comedy because it's kind of appropriate. In fact, I did an editorial about it for Dread Central. If you're curious, for kind of more of my thoughts.
Oh yeah, it's Dread Central.
What's that?
I did see that article.
Oh.
I was joking. I said plug.
Oh, indeed. Yes. Shameless self-promoter here, guys.
It's all good. Yeah, I was also going to joke that if Chris or Christian end up listening to this, just quick shout out. Hi.
Hey, fellas.
Let's see. Yeah, I mean, like the starting to build social networks is also potentially a benefit. It doesn't sound like it's as important to you as some of the other things, but for some people that is the primary or a primary function.
Definitely, and it is. As an adult, it's become more important to me. I've made many adult friends through the horror space for sure.
The internet has helped with that, I'm sure.
Oh, absolutely.
Let's see. Well, jumping into adulthood. So let's start with media. What would be like the three biggest media things that have jumped out to you as being influential?
Media things that have jumped out as being influential. Do you mean any media like book, film, music, etc.?
Right.
Yeah, other film or literature, whatever.
Yeah, I would say
cave paintings.
Sure. I would say on the music front, Alkaline Trio has been really huge to me because they're kind of a macabre punk band. If you're familiar, or if you're not familiar, they're still a macabre punk band. Yeah. They just have kind of dark, like gloomy lyrics, and one of them's a love song about vampires, and the last, well, it's not really necessarily about vampires, but it's a love song with vampire references, kind of implying that the lovers in the song are sort of vampiric in some way. And the last line of the song is "Your coffin or mine." Mm-hmm. So that's a huge one. I think that's kind of influenced me. And actually my friend Christian, who showed me Stay Tuned, played my first Alkaline Trio record for me. And so that's definitely a big one. In terms of media, like film media, John Carpenter's Halloween and Dario Argento's Suspiria, as well as Inferno, are really huge hitters for me. They're films that I can revisit over and over again, and they just take me to kind of a calm, almost like meditative, comforting place where I just feel like I'm visiting with an old friend.
They're soul food.
Soul food, indeed. That is exactly the place that they kind of hold for me. In terms of books, I've read some horror fiction, and I've definitely enjoyed a lot of it. Like I really liked, I think it was called Horror Store by Grady Hendrix, I believe is the author's name, and I really I really love Stephen King's The Shining. Have read a lot of other King, but I don't know if off the top of my head I could necessarily point to a book that is really like, oh, that's the one. And maybe it's just about the way that we consume books. We don't tend to revisit them the same way that we do movies,
Right.
Or at least I don't personally.
Let's start with those three that you mentioned: Halloween, Suspiria, Inferno. You mentioned these were huge hitters to you. What was huge about Halloween for you?
Is probably about as close as one is likely to get to a perfect slasher film. And, even what's not necessarily perfect about it, it influenced an entire, not just generation of filmmakers, but generations, plural, of filmmakers to come after it. And I suppose Black Christmas as well. It's really unfair not to name that, because John Carpenter himself said, I pretty much just ripped off Black Christmas.
I'd never heard that.
Oh yeah, no, he really did, and it just both of those, truthfully. I mean, Black Christmas I really connect with in a huge way, and it's one that I never get tired of revisiting. And in a bizarre way, it puts me in the holiday spirit. The annual rewatch.
It is. It's a good one. It's a Christmas movie. It's made by the same guy as Christmas movies, so there you go.
I know, isn't that? I mean, he's done like the ultimate, slasher Christmas movie and the ultimate family Christmas movie. Bob Clark is a real trickster.
Mm-hmm. Total opposite ends of the spectrum. Love that.
Yeah. But so, I mean, I guess just the impact that it's had is part of it. Also, the way that it makes me feel puts me in the Halloween spirit. It feels like Halloween is not really here until I've rewatched Halloween, So I guess that's a big part of why it's so important to me.
Did you see Halloween Ends?
I did, indeed. And it was a film.
It was. We will leave that at that. There we go.
Halloween Kills 2 was a film.
It was also a film.
We live in a society.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to ask you to dig a little deeper on Halloween. So you mentioned it's a perfect slasher. It had this great impact on you, but describe that a little more about what was its specific reference to you.
Well, like I said, it's comforting. It also it has the ability to still scare me after how many times of seeing it. I could pretty much recite the movie from front to back, but its efficacy is not affected by that. That's sort of a strange way to say that, because efficacy and affected, but I mean, it still has the same impact in spite of, knowing all the plot points, knowing blow for blow what's going to happen, but it still makes an impact on me every single time I watch it. And that's a true testament, I think, to its staying power. And
but as an example, what about it is comforting to you?
Sure. I already kind of said this, and I don't really know how many different ways I can say it without just kind of sounding like I'm saying the same thing again and again. But it really is Halloween to me. It's comforting because, when I watch that, I know that the Halloween season is here, and I feel like that is, it is the indicator that the season has arrived, and it's okay to start celebrating. I mean, it's just it's kind of my kickoff flick, and
it's tradition.
Yeah,
is what it sounds like you're saying.
Yes, thank you. That's right.
I think what I'm hearing is it's very hard for you to pick apart individual moments, and again, it's maybe more of an ambiance thing.
And overall, you're absolutely right, because when you said that, I'm like, I don't know. But I mean, I can't say like, oh, it's the scene where, Michael Myers is wearing the sheet and, impersonating Bob or whatever his name is. I mean, I couldn't really tell you a moment that makes it special to me. It really is kind of a package deal, that whole film. when it comes to Inferno or Suspiria, I could tell you something specific, but when it comes to Halloween, it just is.
Well, that's kind of a good segue because I was thinking about asking you about those next.
Sure.
So let's do that. What about Suspiria?
Well, Suspiria, I love the use of primary colors. I love all of the reds. I love that it's like a Technicolor dream, and oddly enough, it's in the 70s, which was a cinematic time period where a lot of filmmakers were using natural lighting and everything had kind of like a sepia or like brown or yellow kind of earth tone to it. But Argento sort of bucked that and said, no. I'm going to do things.
He did. You kind of almost went in the opposite direction. Like, oh, it's supposed to be dull and realistic? Nah, Technicolors.
Yeah, right. No, I love...
I'm going to go in the other direction and go harder.
Yeah.
Exactly.
And I love that 70s color palette in films like 3 Days of the Condor, for example, or The French Connection. But I also love that Argento did his own thing. And the colors are, almost like a character of their own, and that they're such a big part of what makes the movie. It's certainly not the plot. I mean, the plot is a little bit threadbare and there's lots of stretches and gaps in logic and why the hell are they doing this? But none of that matters because it's an experience. It's intoxicating. It's sucking you in. And it's just wild. Like I love his appreciation for secret passageways. I think he loves secret passageways every bit as much as I do. And that just makes a film better, with like the completely still water in the scene where Jessica Harper and I want to say it's Daria Nicolodi, but I could be wrong, are in the pool, just almost completely motionless, not even splashing. It's just completely still. It's just a beautiful scene to look at. And almost every scene in that movie is beautiful to look at. Honestly, the stained glass, the set design of the school for girls, like everything about it, it's just like a visual treat. It's like candy for your eyes.
It's interesting because everything that you just described it's a visual thing, but the bottom line of it is these were all things that affected your experience of the movie, which is kind of the same thing as it was with Halloween. It's just with Halloween, you couldn't point a finger to specific elements.
Yeah.
Which is not a bad thing. I'm just making an observation.
Certainly.
What about Inferno?
Oh, I love Inferno. I love Inferno every bit as much as Suspiria, and I think it's genuinely underrated. Some of it is just personal preference because it's full of secret passageways and, twists and turns and misdirection and that absolutely positively gorgeous underwater cinematography with the woman that you initially think is going to be the film's heroine. She drops her keychain in the room and, I don't remember if she goes in for her keychain or if she goes in for another reason, but she goes into the underground, basement flooded room, which is just such a unique, unexpected, out of the box, weird thing that you just don't see. But that's the true brilliance, I think, of Dario Argento, is that he does stuff that no one else would do. He has crazy, weird ideas that don't really make any sense on paper, but then he executes them in a way that it's just striking and stunning and intoxicating. I can't stop looking at it. And like the other two that I mentioned, I can just watch it over and over again and never tire of it. It just always makes me feel the same way, which is like I'm visiting with an old friend. Like it's just comfort. It's soothing. To me, it's pretty much perfect.
I wanted to ask you about skydiving.
Yeah.
Because of the whole facing your fears thing. I figured, we'd wait for this until we get to the adult years. Have you done any skydiving?
I haven't, but I've always wanted to do either that or bungee jumping. I'm a little leery on bungee jumping because my husband did it when he was in the army and said that you can feel your organs shift, and that kind of made me think twice about it. But I think skydiving, you probably wouldn't feel your organs shift, and now that you do it with a tandem instructor, strapped
depends on whether or not you're shitting yourself, I guess.
Yeah, my dad, believe it or not, actually did skydiving in maybe the 60s or 70s. And you went solo. And he said the only reason that he jumped was because the guy screamed so loud that he literally jumped in response. And it's so strange.
That's one way to get him out of the plane.
It's so strange that he did it at all, though, because it's so not him. But it is very much a me thing. It's very much something that I think I would find joy from. I'd find joy in facing my fears, find joy in doing something that most people haven't done. and just the rush that you get from that, and knowing that I made it out alive, unless I didn't.
In which case, it wouldn't matter.
Exactly, right?
Halloween as an adult, favorite costume?
Oh,
Have you dressed up?
yeah, I dressed up as Freddy Krueger one year, and
cool.
I that would probably be my favorite. I went to Chipotle and was waiting in line because they had a free burrito for people in costume, and I moved the index razor blade and closed all the other ones and was kind of waving at the burrito artist with that, and she jumped back against the counter behind her, and just I felt terrible because I didn't mean to be that scary, but I absolutely scared the living shit out of her.
Like, oh my God, I'm sorry. Are you okay? No.
Yeah. Would you be more comfortable if I took the mask off? Or
yeah, right. I'm just laughing to myself, thinking about you tapping the glass. Oh, okay, I want this.
Yes. Yeah, I don't think she was a horror fan, sadly.
Least favorite costume as an adult?
I don't know. I can't really think of any. I don't dress up that much as an adult. I have a few times, but nothing really stands out. Yeah, I think one year I was kind of lazy and just bought a couple masks from The Purge, just plastic masks from The Purge, and then wore regular clothes with it. So that would just be least favorite because it was least imaginative and least effort put into it.
Right.
Are Purge masks the current Ben Cooper mask?
Oh, I don't know. Good question.
The cheapo plastic masks.
That or what's his name from Scream?
Oh, yeah, Ghostface.
Yeah.
No, because Ben Cooper masks had variety. There's only one.
Yeah, but it's still.
There's a couple iterations of it, I think, if you count the TV series.
There are. I just heard about that yesterday, and they changed the mask. That's why no one heard about this show.
Kind of going with it just being the common denominator. Like, it's easy. You just put that on and some clothes, and you're done.
Yeah,
right.
Okay, yeah, true.
One of my friends, actually, from high school, she and her husband and their young child, who's about 2, all dressed up as horror characters. She was Ghostface, but not just the mask, like the whole, poncho deal, like the black poncho type thing, and like the knife, and I mean she went all out. And then her husband was Jason and their kid was Chucky. She sent me some pictures of it.
That's great.
And I said, oh my God, that's basically like a viral meme waiting to happen. And she's like, I know, but my husband doesn't really want me to put pictures of our kiddo on the internet. And I'm like, well, that's fair.
There is that. Yeah,
maybe when he's a little older, you've got like internet gold with you there.
Yeah. Right. Well, the other argument you could make is, well, he's in the costume.
That is a very fair point, and maybe he will come around to see that.
Yeah.
Right. So the next 2 questions I'm going to ask you are going to be over your entire life, not just one section. And it's also not just about horror. So these could be non-horror answers. But I'm going to give you the 2 questions at the same time because it could be the same answer for both or 2 different answers. But first question would be, what is your favorite movie? And then the second one is, what movie you watched more times than any other?
Certainly. My favorite movie is 3 Days of the Condor with Robert Redford and Faye Dunaway. It's from the late 70s, and it's kind of like an espionage film from a time before Jason Bourne and Marvel movies. And, everything was like an event with explosions and jumping out of buildings and, driving cars out of a parking garage, like into another parking garage on the other side of the street. All of that is great, and I really enjoy it sometimes. But I also, more than that, enjoy a good character-driven thriller that doesn't necessarily rely on what I would say can sometimes border on gimmickry. It's just a pretty perfect film. And it came out at a time where there was so much paranoia about the government and authority, and it really kind of leans into that in a big way and deals with government corruption, and just a great performance from Robert Redford, and a great, slightly more restrained performance from Faye Dunaway than we saw in, Mommy Dearest or Supergirl, of course. And the other question, movie I've watched the most times. There are a few. I'll try to narrow it down as much as I can. One of them would be Rad, the BMX movie.
Really?
I own that on VHS, bootleg DVD, since it never actually got a real DVD release. and then Vinegar Syndrome Special Edition, and also Steelbook.
They did release it recently, but you have the Steelbook of Rad.
I do. I do. So Rad, possibly. The other contender would be Cloak and Dagger. It was written by Tom Holland and directed by Richard Franklin, who did Psycho 2. I absolutely love that movie. I love the fact that they're not afraid to put a child in peril. You know, one of the terrorists tells Henry Thomas, I could turn you into shredded meat in about 2 seconds, but I'm not going to. I'm going to shoot you in the stomach and watch you bleed to death. Like,
it's a kids movie.
That just gave me life as a kid. I was like, oh my God, that is so scary. And I love it.
Yeah. I remember seeing Cloak and Dagger when I was like, I don't know, 7.
Yeah.
It's dark.
It's dark.
I think it was marketed as a kids movie, wasn't it?
Yes.
Yes, and it's rated PG. I mean, and it was marketed to kids, absolutely. But I freaking love that movie. It doesn't, talk down to its audience, and I think it fills, what is currently a void. Like, we don't do that in movies anymore, but it's like it gives kids a movie that says, like, hey, we hear you, we see you, we take you seriously, and you could die too.
I hear you.
You could die too.
Yeah.
And I think we need that sometimes. I mean, yes, it's a little, it's a little taboo, but I don't know. I mean, if I had a kid that was the right age, I would absolutely show them that movie based on, their like, I wouldn't show it to a kid that it was going to scare to death. But if I had a kid that was like me as a kid, I would be like, let's watch that together, kid. This is a fun movie.
You need to know where your boundaries are.
Yeah.
You can die too. What about Rad?
Yeah, I love that particular template. Like, it follows the same template as the Sarah Jessica Parker movie, Girls Just Want to Have Fun, which my cousin forced me to watch as a kid, and I ended up secretly loving it, but not wanting to admit it because it was a quote-unquote girl movie. But it's that whole template of, I wish I could be a insert here, and then you've got the parental figure that's like, you can't be that. And then you've got the best friend that's supporting you but isn't as good as you at what you're doing and is somehow eliminated from the competition. And then you go on to win the competition, as Crew did in Rad, and as Sarah Jessica Parker's character Janie did in Girls Just Want to Have Fun. It's just, I think as a kid, it's so fun to see other kids like doing crazy big things and winning contests and making headlines and proving that they can. I think I've always found that so inspiring. And even as an adult, I still kind of find it inspiring because it's like, just reminds me to shoot for the stars. And, you don't always nail it, but you're never going to nail it if you don't try.
Right.
And, I've just always been someone that just goes for it. I started as my journalism career began 11 or 12 years ago when I just started a blog because I wanted to write about movies. And, I was able to leave my 9-to-5 behind and do it full time, which not a lot of people get to do that. And the only reason I got to is because I just kept trying and wouldn't take no for an answer. And, even when I, was basically living off of ramen and not really making a viable living doing it, I just kept doing it and, took on side hustles and, whatever I could to get by. But, these days I primarily, 95% of my income comes from writing. And, I'm grateful to be in that place. And I think it's because I had the same like foolish idea that I could do something just like the people in those movies do.
Mm. The two themes that I hear coming up again and again in this call are kind of flip sides of the same coin. One is either, violating a boundary in a negative sense, or violating a boundary in the sense of overcoming or conquering something.
I love to violate.
Hopefully in a good sense.
Oh, certainly in a good sense.
In the violating the rules.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, there we go.
With consent.
Only ever with consent. Believe me.
No. Yeah, that's the flip side of the coin of there's the good and the bad aspects of the same thing, sort of a concept. So that explains Rad and Cloak and Dagger. But then I'm looking back at 3 Days of the Condor, and I'm wondering if that one's more of being a fan of it as an auteur, because this has come up in some of our previous calls too, where particularly when you're talking to somebody who's in the business, shall we say, there are things that we love because they're really well done from the auteur perspective, but they may not hit the same notes as, like, for example, the Rad and Cloak and Dagger do because of your going back to your historical stuff. Does that make sense? Or is there something about 3 Days of the Condor that's hitting something that we've missed?
What I love about it, I know I said I love the, Technicolor dream of Suspiria, but I also love those kind of gritty earth tones that you see in 70s cinema. I love, like I said before, that it's character driven, that it's not an event film that relies on explosions, that, the intensity just comes from Robert Redford being in constant peril from, about 10 minutes into the movie all the way through to the end. And even the ending is a little bit like, well, is he really going to be okay? I don't know. I love the way that it makes me feel paranoid and tense and like excited and gripped by what's going on. It's just, it's so engaging and engrossing, and so I guess I love it, not because it makes me feel like I can go out and conquer the world, but just because it's so harrowing and so all engrossing that it just pulls me in, and just for an intense nonstop thrill ride. Gives me the same kind of feeling that a horror movie does, like just makes me feel a little bit unsafe in a safe way.
Right. Well, the thought that came to me while you were saying those things, particularly when you said harrowing and constant peril, I mean, it's basically, that's the threat of violation.
Yeah.
It's the threat.
Certainly. It gets you in a safe way, all kind of ramped up and feeling tense and like, there's danger lurking around every corner.
Do you see any common threads about what kinds of horror you like? Cannibalism, occult, metaphysical?
I love occult horror, and that's probably because it was, like the most off limits when I was growing up. But I love the cheesy stuff like Satan's School for Girls or Daughters of Satan, The Devil's Reign, stuff that's not necessarily incredible in the conventional sense, but it just has great atmosphere, great themes. I love The Devil Rides Out. And that one's kind of terrifying for me to watch because it's got a scene with 2 rattlesnakes trapped in an RV.
Oh, shit.
But yeah, I love occult horror. I love slashers. I love home invasion horror. And I suppose, some of that just has to do with like what terrifies me the most. I mean, The Strangers is one of the most plausible setups for a horror movie that I can think of. Certainly a lot more plausible than a Michael Myers situation, perhaps. So it feels more grounded in reality, and that makes it scarier.
Well, when you said occult, being a subgenre that you like, because it's off limits when you were a kid, that's true for that subgenre. But I personally am still coming back to not a subgenre thing, but a common element of all of this is that threat of danger, the threat of the violation of or the thrill of these boundaries. And I guess some of the last questions here then start digging into things like, do you have any idea why it is that you like that?
I think it's the same reason that I, like to go on roller coasters or liked to, go through the haunted house. It's like a part of it is maybe that you're kind of challenging yourself to, endure something that isn't entirely comfortable, and when you come out the other end, there's a sense of relief and a sense of satisfaction. I think that's one piece of it. And I think that I just genuinely like the feeling of being scared. I like anything that can scare me. So the scarier it is, chances are the more that I'm going to like it. I think you're, releasing adrenaline and endorphins when you're scared. Your body chemically changes, and I like the way that feels. Like it gives me a huge freaking rush. So, the more it scares me, the better, I guess, would be one piece to that.
Yeah.
That kind of answers the next question, which is to say, once we've narrowed in on what it is that you enjoy, in this case, thrill and challenge and things like that, excitement, why horror? Because couldn't there be other genres that touch on those same things? But like you say, the scarier it is, the more exciting it is for you. Like the other genres maybe don't really touch on fear the same way. It's not as scary to you.
Right, but something like 3 Days of the Condor, for example, really ramps up the tension, and it's a similar sensation, and it's a similar chemical reaction in my experience.
Well, it's not necessarily a horror. It's more of a suspense, I guess.
Yeah, it certainly is not a horror movie in any way. It's very much a suspense espionage thriller, but it just has that constant threat of peril.
Yeah. Do you find yourself liking other genres that touch on that tension equally as much as horror? Or
Absolutely. Horror is one of my favorite genres, but I wouldn't necessarily say that it's my favorite. You know, it might be in like a three-way tie for my favorite, but it's not like my only sweet spot.
I'm curious what the other two are then.
I love a good thriller, any kind of twisty mystery, psychological thriller, suspense. I think I already said suspense, but a suspense movie. You know, anything that just kind of gets my blood pumping. I love it. I love that sensation. It's comforting to me. It's exciting, and it provides a sense of escapism because it pulls you into the proceedings, like you're a part of it, but once again in a safe way. Like you're a spectator, but you're also right there in the thick of it.
Right. Kind of reminds me of you crawling through your crawl space when you were a kid.
Yes. No, you're absolutely right. You're absolutely right. You guys do a good job bringing this full circle.
No, I mean, you're the one giving it to us. You know, we're just pointing it back to you.
No, I get that. But at the same time, I mean, your questions are very strategically structured to allow me to take you back there. So it's impressive is what I mean.
Thank you.
They were designed in Russia.
Yeah. Shh. Trade secret.
You said too much.
Yeah, we'll have to kill you now. You can die too.
That would be a good tagline for a podcast, I think.
Yeah, you can die too.
Would.
All right, last question. Is there anything that you've thought of that might be relevant but hasn't come up on the call? Maybe something that you thought of at one point and then the conversation drifted and you didn't get a chance to say?
God, I don't know. I think we did a pretty good job of encapsulating it all. I really can't think of anything. Do you guys have any other questions for me that you can think of? Anything you'd like me to, extrapolate or expand upon? But on my end, I'm good.
I'm good, Chris.
Yeah.
I thought there would be some strange question.
No, I've chicaneryed enough this call.
we had who was it? RK Kadic. Oh, he says I'm an open book. You can talk about anything. And Chris is like, "Did you kill it, JFK?"
It's a fair question. He opened himself up to that.
Yes, yeah, exactly. Well, thank you very much for your time. We've had a great pleasure talking to you.
Well, I've had a great pleasure talking to you guys as well.
Yeah. And thank you to anybody out there listening. If you like what we're doing, come hit us up on horrormixushappy.com. You can buy merch. We've got Patreon, buy us a coffee, or if you want, just tell a friend.